The topic of this screencast is anterior pituitary hormones. You may find information on this topic in Chapter 9 of your textbook. This screencast was designed to achieve the following objectives: describe the anterior pituitary gland and its secretion of hormones in response to the hypothalamus, list the 6 hormones secreted by the hypothalamus and note their chemistry. For prolactin and growth hormone, describe the following: stimulus of secretion, chemistry, target tissue and effect. Describe the effects of hypo and hypersecretion of these hormones, and describe how these hormones are regulated. While the posterior pituitary gland is composed of nervous tissue and is essentially an extension of the hypothalamus, the anterior pituitary gland is a true gland. It contains cuboidal epithelial cells which secrete hormones. The hypothalamus contains neurons which secrete hormones that enter a capillary bed in the pituitary stalk. From there, these hormones are taken to a second capillary bed located in the anterior pituitary gland. This capillary bed gives these hypothalamic hormones access to the endocrine cells of the anterior pituitary gland. These hypothalamic hormones then either stimulate or inhibit the secretion of 6 hormones by the endocrine cells of the anterior pituitary gland. All 6 of these hormones are hydrophilic. All 6 are secreted in response to hypothalamic hormones and therefore are secreted in response to hormonal stimuli. Of these 6, 4 target other endocrine organs or glands and therefore are trophic hormones. The only 2 hormones that aren't tropic hormones are prolactin and growth hormone. We will discuss these 2 hormones in this screencast and save the other hormones for subsequent screencasts. Prolactin, released from the anterior pituitary gland, targets certain cells of the breast which are involved in manufacturing the components of breast milk. So prolactin stimulates and maintains milk production by the breast following childbirth. Prolactin also is involved with temporarily stopping ovulation following childbirth. Prolactin secretion is stimulated by the suckling process. Suckling stimulates receptors in the breast, which send sensory input to the brain, which causes an increase in the release of prolactin in the anterior pituitary gland. To my knowledge, there is no classic positive or negative feedback mechanism for the release of prolactin. Prolactin secretion simply increases when the receptors of the breast are stimulated during suckling. Prolactin is found in males, however, the function is unknown. What is known is that if there is a tumor on the anterior pituitary gland and there is excess prolactin produced in males, that it can cause erectile dysfunction. Growth hormone is a protein hormone, so it is hydrophilic, and it's released from the anterior pituitary gland in response to the release of specific hormones from the hypothalamus. Now, your book goes into very specific details on how this is accomplished, the specific hormones that are involved, but I will not hold you responsible for that level of detail. Just know that the anterior pituitary gland does release growth hormone in response to hormones from the hypothalamus. Growth hormone targets many tissues of the body, but especially cartilage, bone, muscle, as well as adipose tissue. And overall, growth hormone promotes the growth and repair of the tissues that it targets. Growth hormone is a very important metabolic hormone. It has a sparing effect on protein because it causes the body to utilize fat and carbohydrate even more as a source of energy, or ATP. And how does it do this? Growth hormone targets fat cells, adipocytes, causing the breakdown of triglycerides in those fat cells to release fatty acids into the blood to be used by the cells of the body as sources of ATP. Growth hormone also targets cells of the liver, causing those liver cells to break down glycogen, the storage form of glucose, releasing glucose into the blood to be used as sources of ATP. So growth hormone helps maintain blood sugar levels, and that shifts more of the burden, if you will, of ATP production to the breakdown and oxidation of glucose through aerobic respiration. So by increasing the amount of ATP supplied to the cells of the body from the oxidation of fat and the oxidation of glucose, there will be less breakdown of protein for the production of ATP, and there will be more amino acids made available for the synthesis of protein to maintain protein, grow structures that contain protein, and for the repair of structures containing protein. And remember that protein is primarily used in the body for maintaining the structural integrity of our cells, tissues, and organs. Growth hormone is a very important metabolic hormone. Overall, growth hormone causes the body to preferentially use fat and carbohydrate as a source of ATP, while sparing amino acids to maintain and build proteins. And how does it do this? Well, growth hormone targets adipose cells, causing those adipose cells to break down their triglycerides to fatty acids, which then enter the blood and can be used by cells of the body for the production of ATP. Growth hormone also targets the cells of the liver, causing those cells to break down glycogen, the storage form of carbohydrate, or rather the storage form of glucose specifically, to release glucose into the blood to maintain blood glucose levels and to allow ATP production to be made from the oxidation of glucose. So overall, if most ATP is being provided by the oxidation of fats and the oxidation of glucose, this spares amino acids to be used to maintain, grow, and repair structures that are composed of protein. In other words, again, growth hormone is sparing protein while allowing fat and carbohydrate to be used as sources of ATP. Some of the more obvious effects of growth hormone are easily seen on skeletal muscles and long bones. Growth hormone increases the growth of bones by increasing the activity of the osteoblasts, the bone-forming cells, and the chondroblasts, the cartilage-forming cells. And as you know, both are involved in the growth of bones. Growth hormone causes both osteoblasts and chondroblasts to increase the deposition of protein in the extracellular matrix of bone and cartilage tissue. In individuals with an active epiphyseal plate, growth hormone both causes lengthening and widening of the bones. In adults where there is no active epiphyseal plate, growth hormone does not cause the bone to lengthen, but appositional growth can still occur, and so growth hormone causes the widening of bones in adults. Growth hormone also increases the growth of skeletal muscles, which of course are associated with bones. Growth hormone secretion peaks at puberty, which is one of the reasons why individuals grow so quickly during puberty, and growth hormone declines from there, especially during old age. And it's believed that this is at least partially responsible for the decline in muscle mass and the thinning of the skin that occurs during old age. Growth hormone secretion also increases during sleep. So when your parents told you when you were a juvenile that you needed to get a good night's sleep and that it was important for your health and normal development, there was a physiological basis for that statement. Growth hormone also increases in response to physical stresses such as exercise. Now let's look briefly at the effects on the body of hyposecretion or hypersecretion of growth hormone. Hypersecretion of growth hormone during childhood causes a condition called gigantism. Hypersecretion of hormone causes excessive lengthening of the bone. So you have an individual that upon reaching adulthood is excessively tall. This is illustrated by the picture shown here from your book. Here we have two identical twins. The twin on the left is exhibiting gigantism. He is much taller than his twin brother on the right. Also notice that many of his features, particularly of his hands and feet, are exaggerated. And this is because in addition to excessive bone lengthening, there's also excessive widening of the bones and tissues associated with those bones as well. Hypersecretion of growth hormone is not usually associated with dysfunctions of the hypothalamus, but rather the anterior pituitary gland. For example, a tumor of the anterior pituitary gland can cause excessive secretion of growth hormone. Hypersecretion of growth hormone in adults does not result in excessive lengthening of bones since the epiphyseal plates are not active, but it will result in the excessive widening of bones by appositional growth. There will also be excessive growth of other soft tissues, cartilage, muscle, other connective tissues in response to hypersecretion of growth hormone. And so you get a condition in adults called acromegaly, where the hands, feet, face are abnormal in appearance. You have exaggerated features. Notice in the picture labeled A, in the younger years of this patient, he looked quite normal, but over the years, due to hypersecretion of growth hormone, there was excessive widening of the bones of his face and hands, and this led to the more abnormal appearance as illustrated in picture labeled B. Hyposecretion of growth hormone in children causes a condition called pituitary dwarfism. With a reduced secretion of growth hormone, there is slower lengthening of the long bones. So the individual, the child, is shorter than normal. Also, because of the effects of growth hormone in causing the body to utilize fat as a source of ATP, an individual also will tend to be a little more chubby than normal. The effects of hyposecretion of hormone are illustrated in this figure from your book, where the boy on the left is shorter and a little more chubby than his fraternal twin sister, shown on the right. The regulation of growth hormone secretion is quite complicated. Your book goes into the details of the feedback mechanisms. However, That level of detail is beyond the scope of this class, and I am not going to hold you responsible for it. What I basically want you to know is that as growth hormone levels in the blood rise, there is a decrease in secretion of growth hormone from the posterior pituitary gland, and there's also a decrease in secretion of hormones from the hypothalamus that stimulate the release of growth hormone by the anterior pituitary gland. So growth hormone release is regulated by negative feedback mechanisms. Now let's review the objectives of the screencast. Describe the anterior pituitary gland and its secretion of hormones in response to the hypothalamus. List the 6 hormones secreted by the hypothalamus and note their chemistry. For prolactin and growth hormone, describe the following: stimulus of secretion, chemistry, target tissue and effect. Describe the effects of hypo and hypersecretion of the hormones, and describe how the hormones are regulated. Our next screencast will cover the thyroid gland.